My name is Maury Litwack. I'm the founder of the Teach Coalition and the managing director of public affairs for the Orthodox Union. For those who don't know, Teach Coalition is a project of the Orthodox Union which advocates for government funding for non-public schools. In particular, our leadership is made up of yeshivas and Jewish day schools, and we fight for larger funding for non-public schools as well. We're very happy today to talk about a topic which we think is very interesting, and I always know it's a hot topic because when my phone blows up before it's on the cover of Wall Street Journal or CNN or somewhere else like that, I know it's when it's being broken by community members, I know it's something that everyone wants to talk about. So the second we found out about the decision, we said, who are the best people that we can get to come and talk about this decision and really help us understand it? And we're very fortunate that we have two people who really are deep in this and understand it to explain it to us and what it means and larger implications. So I want to just welcome Nicole Garnett and Avi Helfand. I'm going to give them both their bios. Nicole is the John P. Murphy Foundation Professor of Law at the University of Notre Dame, where she is also a fellow of the Institute for Educational Initiatives and a senior policy advisor to the Alliance for Catholic Education, a program engaged in a wide array of efforts to strengthen and sustain K-12 Catholic schools. In addition, she's a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. She's the author of Lost Classroom, Lost Community, Catholic Schools' Importance in Urban America, as well as numerous articles on education policy. Prior to Notre Dame, she served as a law clerk for Associate Justice Clarence Thomas at the Supreme Court and Justice Morris Arnold of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit. She is it keeps going. Wow, look at this, Nicole. And so
That's plenty.
A BA in political science teacher from Stanford University and her JD from Yale Law School. So that is Nicole. Avi Helfand, who is not new to our webinars, not new to the work that we're doing, is the Brennan Mann Foundation Chair in Law and Religion and co-director of the New Bar Institute of Law, Religion, and Ethics at Pepperdine, Caruso School of Law, visiting professor in Oscar M. I'm going to say this wrong. Rubinson, distinguished fellow at Yale Law School and senior fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute. In addition, he was recently appointed, we're very proud of this, as senior legal advisor for the OU's Teach Coalition, which is, we just said, a multi-state grassroots movement devoted to advocating for non-public school funding and resources. Avi is a frequent author and lecturer. His stuff is everywhere: Yale Law Journal, NYU Law Review, Duke Law Journal, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Los Angeles Times. Prior to joining Pepperdine, Professor Helfand was associated at Davis and Polk. Prior entering private practice, Professor Helfand clerk for Honorable Julia Smith Gibbons of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Court. Now, this is very important, all these introductions, because people always ask me, well, Maury, what do we think of this legal opinion or that legal opinion? And I scored a 151 on my LSAT. So I am not someone who should be. I was rejected by many prestigious law schools, including American University and Catholic University and Georgetown. So I am not someone who should be giving any legal advice. But I'm smart enough to get the right people on who know these things. So I'm going to launch right into it with Nicole. Nicole, explain to us this decision. What happened?
Okay, so I don't want to get too much into the weeds. The bottom line is that on Monday, the Oklahoma Virtual Charter School Board, which is a board that authorizes statewide virtual charter schools, approved the application for a school that will be called St. Isidore of Sevilla Catholic Virtual School. It's a joint effort of the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City and the Diocese of Tulsa to provide Catholic education to kids throughout the state. The reason this is important, there's a long wind up to getting here, and we're just getting started. But the reason it's important is that every state prohibits religious charter schools, and most states, like Oklahoma, also prohibit schools that are religiously affiliated. So Oklahoma just approved a religious charter school that's run by two dioceses. Obviously, the board decided, three members of the board decided that those provisions prohibiting religious charter schools were unconstitutional and unenforceable. And when they did that, they approved the first religious charter school in the country.
Nicole, what are charter schools and how do they differ from traditional public schools and non-public schools?
So charter schools are schools that are they're available and they're authorized in 45 states. They are designated universally public to be public. They're called public schools and all state laws, and they're publicly funded schools, but they're privately operated schools. And as I mentioned, all states, they're regulated differently in different states. Some of them are regulated very lightly, like in Oklahoma, some of them more tightly regulated. But all of them are privately operated, and all of them by law must be secular schools. And so in that sense, they are distinct from private schools, which are also privately operated. They're not designated as public schools. In many states, including Florida, where I understand you're from, many private schools now receive public funds. So they're a hybrid in a sense. And the one distinction between private schools, the typical private schools, and charter schools is that charter schools go through this authorization process where the people seeking to operate the school to get the funding basically become government contractors. They put an application in, like St. Isidore, and say, here, this is our plan. We're going to operate a statewide virtual charter school. It's going to have Catholic instruction. It's going to be, really great academically. And then the school gets approved. In, say, a voucher state like Florida, you would just say, I'm a private school, I'm accredited, I want to participate in this program. And the school wouldn't necessarily be approved as a school. It would just be approved as a school that can participate in the private school choice program.
I have one more question for you, and I'm going to ask Professor Helfand some questions also. But before I do so, I'm not from Florida. I'm in the New York area. My in-laws live in Florida. I think my mother-in-law is on the call. So we're which is probably, all that family in Florida is probably why I don't live in Florida. But we have a lot of charter schools here in New York and New Jersey also. I guess I want to understand something. Why, until this point, have there never been religious charter schools, in your opinion, Nicole?
There are two reasons. I think one is political and one is legal. So the political reason is that charter schools originally grew out of honestly opposition to private school choice programs like vouchers. The original understanding was that these were going to be a way to have privately operated schools that would increase pluralism in places like New York and New Jersey and the other 45 states, or the other 43 states that have them. But they would be secular, and the money would not go to existing religious schools. So the original understanding of what a charter school was it's a privately operated school. It's going to increase pluralism, but the one pluralism it's not going to increase is religion. And so they're safer, they're better than vouchers. This is like a compromise position rather than giving the money to the Catholic schools and the yeshivas. So that's a political reason. I think the legal reason is until relatively recently, over the last, I don't know, Avi can say 5 years, it's really become pretty evident that laws prohibiting religious charter schools are maybe unconstitutional. There was a period of time, and maybe in some people, if you read the New York Times, still think we're in it, that funding religious charter schools would be unconstitutional. And then there was a period of time when it was thought that maybe it was okay to fund them, but you didn't have to. But there's been a series of legal decisions that we can talk about over the last 5 to 7 years, which have really called into question laws that require charter schools to be secular and prohibit them from being affiliated with religious organizations. So those, I think, are the two reasons.
Thank you, Professor Garnett. The Avi, in terms of you, I think it's a great transition. Isn't this a clear violation of separation of church and state? This seems to be, charter schools are public schools. We heard that charter schools are public schools. It's a form of a public school. What are we missing here?
Yeah, charter schools are like a little bit of a Rorschach test. Like, you're looking at them and you're like, it's almost, you can tell a lot about the person by what they think they see. It's a combination of two things. It's like it's called a public school by state, typically, I think always, by state law. So it's authorized by the state, by the government, and it's run under the rules of the public school system, but it's operated by a private entity. So you have a sponsor government agency or government entity, and then you have an operating private entity. Well, so what do you want to call this thing? Is it public or private? for the purpose of constitutional issues and questions. I think that's the nub of it. There are more complications, but that's the core of it. If it's a private school, we've had decisions since 2017 from the Supreme Court. And these summarized super quickly, these decisions say if you have some sort of government funding program or government benefit or government operation where they're saying all private entities feel free to apply and participate, except if you are religious, the Supreme Court has said that is unconstitutional. That's religious discrimination. On kind of the other side of the ledger, if it's a public school, well, the Supreme Court hasn't quite said that. They said, well, when we're talking about government generating its own kind of business, its own kind of entities, there it can decide what the nature of the program is. If it can say the public school, the thing that public schools do is provide a non-sectarian education. That last bit is a little bit more complicated, but I think that's pretty much it. So if you look at it as a private school, it looks like religious discrimination. If you look at it like a public school, you'd say to yourself, wait a minute, you have a separation of church and state problem because you have a religious public school. And this is something Nicole is doing a lot of litigation on this front, something through the Fourth Circuit right now. The Supreme Court may take a case that addresses this question. Ultimately, what is a charter school? Do we want to think it's a public school because its sponsor is public and its funding is primarily public? Or is it a private school because that's how it's being operated? And, the funky thing is the answer might be different depending on what you're talking about. What do you need to violate the Constitution? To violate the Constitution, you need the state to be doing something. But the state really isn't, a lot of the time, it isn't doing anything when it comes to charter schools. It's not deciding what the dress code is. It's not deciding, how to discipline particular students. And so it's not the state doing anything. So you might say, listen, I'm looking at all this stuff. You're telling me it's a problem of separation of church and state, but it's really not state. It's church and this private entity. Ultimately, figuring out the answer to the big picture question, whether it's at its core public or private, will answer a lot of the questions in terms of if we want to think of it as a problem of separation of church and state.
And let me just, oh,
Can
sorry.
I follow up really quickly on what I just said? I mean, one thing to keep in mind that for those of you who are not lawyers is that this is a really hard question because the Supreme Court has also made clear it doesn't matter what it's called. The word public, assigning the word public to it doesn't make it the real question is it a government actor or is it a private actor? It's not what it's called, it's what it is. And so even if every state calls it a public school, that doesn't mean it's a government actor for the reasons that Professor Helfand just identified. So many people will say charter schools are public schools because look, the word says public, but that's not really the relevant question. It's whether it's the government's action that's being challenged. Is it the government being religious? Is it the government requiring girls to wear a particular, modest skirt to school and the boys get to wear pants? Or is it a private actor? And it's not a straightforward question.
Do you? I want to get into the details on the charter versus non-publics because I think there's a lot of questions in our community, especially about those distinctions, especially in light of the fact that there are Hebrew charter schools in the country and what that means. So I want to come back to that, but I just want to get a little bit of a take here. If you think, Professor Helfand, if this goes to the Supreme Court, what do you think this means, practically speaking?
Oh, I feel like Nicole would be like way better at this one, but I have this instinct that Nicole may not share with me, which is I think if it goes to the Supreme Court, sorry about this, Nicole, this is terrible. I think it may lose. I think they may consider charter schools public schools. I think, there's been this massive kind of pressure or push within the Supreme Court to say when you have a private, some sort of government benefit program where you're saying, yes, all these private institutions, you can't exclude religion. And I think all the kind of momentum there's going to be a desire on the court to kind of stem the tide a little bit and say, yes, but like here we are starting to veer into something that looks a little public. And so I think they're going to want to try to create some sort of boundaries on this kind of general momentum. That's an instinct and a prediction of mine, not a kind of statement as to what I think the right answer is. So that's my guess. And if it remains a public school, I do think it's possible there will be some church state issues. Now, I say that, but it's not completely clear. You know, the Supreme Court, even if you're a public entity, the Supreme Court has really limited the impact of the Establishment Clause, limited the rules where public entities violate church-state separation. And, you know, one of the big questions here is like, ultimately, the Supreme Court now thinks even public entities, they violate separation of church and state. I think really at its core, when they do something that is coercive, they force somebody to engage in something religious. Now, here's the puzzle. Nobody forces anybody to go to a charter school. It's voluntary. So you might start saying to yourself, I think it's a public entity. Got it. But you don't have to go there. You can go to your regular public school. So maybe even if it's a public school, it's okay. That's like the secondary argument. There, I don't have a strong instinct on how the court might come out. On the flip side, you might say, wait a minute, if the government starts funding lots and lots of charter schools and a bunch of them are religious, there's going to be subtle forms of pressure, of incentives in order to join and go to a religious charter school. Maybe I start feeling like that does feel a little bit coercive. So I think both issues are in play. For religious charter schools to lose, I think, one, they have to be considered a public school, and two, it also has to start looking like going to them, there's enough of it and there's enough pressure or incentive to go there that the court thinks they're coercive. And I don't know how each of those are going to come out. I think in the end, the Supreme Court is likely to stem the tide here, but I don't know. Nicole may have very different.
We got a thumbs down from Professor Helfand. Where are we at from Professor Garnett? I feel like Siskel Niebuhr. How are we doing?
Well, so I think, look, I'm a lawyer and I have been involved in the Oklahoma situation. So, you know, I have my own goggles on. I've been writing about this forever. I think the logical import of these two lines of cases that Professor Helfand talks about, the religion cases that have come out, what says if you extend a benefit to a private entity, you can't exclude religious private entities. The logical import of those cases is that charter school laws that prohibit religious charter schools are unconstitutional. Is there some kind of like, holy cow, there's 7 million kids in charter schools and we need to stop it, but draw a line somewhere? You know, I don't know. I can't read the tea leaves. I mean, the Supreme Court regularly does things that surprise me. But I think logically I'm right. They're private and then they should be able to be religious. The second thing I think, though, that is a complicating factor, and this is really kind of in the legal weeds, is it's the Supreme Court's decision about whether they're public or private has implications far beyond this narrow question about charter schools. So there's currently a case pending. The Supreme Court has yet to take it. It may take it. It's a question of whether a charter school in North Carolina, it's a classical school that requires girls to wear skirts, is it a public school or a private school? Is it a violation of the Equal Protection Clause to require a privately operated classical charter school to require a uniform that is different for boys and girls? And the Fourth Circuit said, oh, it's a violation of the Equal Protection Clause because this is a public school. So the Equal Protection Clause applies to this classical charter school, nothing to do with religion. And it had this theory that was like, well, the government is engaging the school, the government is paying for this school. And I wrote a brief for the Jewish Coalition for Religious Liberty in this case, and we made the argument, like, you got to be careful here, court, because if this charter school is a public school and is bound by the Constitution, let's just talk about all the different things that could become government and adoption agencies, soup kitchens, you know, like all the things that Jewish organizations, Catholic organizations do, social service providers in cooperation with and government funding. And you know what? Since that decision, the Fourth Circuit has held that a private adoption agency that gets government funding is the government. And so I think that while Professor Helfand may be right, that there might be some kind of an instinct, like this is a little hinky, that the implications for saying a charter school that's privately operated and not controlled by the government is the government has implications that are big religious liberty implications outside of the realm of schooling, because so many religious organizations do so much good in cooperation with the government. We don't want Jewish and Catholic social services to become the government, because then they're bound by the Constitution. And I mean, at least in theory, including the Establishment Clause. That would be super weird. So I don't know. I think just like confronting this issue head on in this case that has nothing to do with religion. I think if they take that case, they'll say that charter school is not a state actor.
So I want to come back to where the country's going in terms of some of this religious liberty and the Supreme Court's leanings, et cetera, which I think is very interesting, and you both have touched upon. But I want to talk about just charter schools. And I remember that in Florida, when we were first starting work on Teach Nationally, people always would come up to me and say, well, what about the Hebrew charter schools, which were prevalent then? And they'd come up to me and say it others. And I would always answer two things, which is, number one is charter schools are public schools. So don't compare them to our non-public schools, our yeshivas and day schools. And then they would say to me, well, what else? And I'd say the number two is that means that there are restrictions on what they can and can't do. And it also means that the enrollment is often done by a lottery system, and you can't control who's in your classroom or not. So I'd like to understand that, because I think that's a big deal in terms of this, which is what happens to both of those things. And I know, Professor Garnett, you're very familiar with New York and New York getting into it with the non-public schools and the whole substantial equivalency conversation there as well, which has been deeply concerning to both the Jewish community and the Catholic community and the Islamic community and the larger non-public school community, even the non-faith-based public school community. So I would like to understand a little bit about those things and those concerns, because wouldn't that be the case with a public school, which we call a charter school? How do you understand that, especially in light of this?
So a couple things. First is there are Hebrew charter schools. They're not religious schools. I mean, the ACLU saber rattles sometimes and says they serve kosher food, so therefore religious. They're not. They're not religious schools. They can teach Hebrew. They can have after-school religious education. There are Catholic schools that do. There are Catholic wraparounds, we call them. They're secular sandwich. You have a secular school day with after-school religious education. New York has some of those schools that have after-school Catholic education, and they're secular during the day. So I wouldn't call that a Catholic school, and I don't call a Hebrew charter school a Jewish school, because it can't teach Judaism. So the core of being a Jewish school is to teach Judaism, as is the core of being a Catholic school to teach Catholicism. So I'm not in this game for halfway. I mean, St. Isidore is going to be Catholic all the way. Now, that's a different question than the regulation, though. Some people in the private school choice movement, which is really my world, and I've been involved in private school choice forever, say to your point, it's a bad idea. We shouldn't do this. Religious organizations shouldn't do it. They shouldn't cooperate with the government. The regulations are going to undermine the autonomy and the identity of the schools. And I have three answers to that. The first is, I think religious people have the same right to make decisions about whether to cooperate with the government as anybody else. So if the regulations are too much, then don't do it. But that doesn't make it less a constitutional problem to prohibit it. So that's the first answer. The second answer is it is true that some regulations might be problematic, and so don't do it. But the government might be able to impose them. As you point out, the substantial equivalency debate, those schools, I mean, they maybe get some money, but they're not being regulated because they get money. They're just being regulated. So the regulations, we need to be vigilant about regulations no matter what. And then the third point is, I'm a private school choice person. I love the incredible, dramatic expansion of private school choice in the last year. Universals in 7 states now. And those things are lightly regulated. And so in those states where they're available, then maybe it's most religious organizations will say, I'm going to go with the ESA in Florida or in Indiana, but I'm not going to be a charter school. That's great. But again, they might become more regulated. I don't think it's not an invincibility shield. But in many states like New York, if you're a religious school, your choice is the following. If you want public funding, you must secularize. there's never going to be private, maybe you get private schools with a modest tax rate, probably not in New Jersey and New York. And I just think that's really unjust. That's what got me started on this over a decade ago. It's just the injustice of saying to religious schools, yeah, if you want public funding, you have to just do religion after school when no one's looking.
It's funny. I believe that if I was making predictions, I think the tax credits or ESAs are more likely in New York and New Jersey than massive expansion of charter schools. I think charter schools, if you saw it happen in New York, and I've mentioned this to people on that called me about this week, which is I said, even if you can tackle some of the concerns, if the Supreme Court approves it and you can tackle some of the regulatory concerns that you mentioned and other things like that, you have to actually have a open avenue where they want to expand charter schools. In New York, for example, that was one of the biggest fights in the Albany legislature this year. The funding for non-public schools is not the fight this year. That was pretty much a given at the beginning of the budget. It was much more in terms of the charter schools and what they will allow, and that's been the case for a very long time. I just want to ask though a little more, just to clarify, Professor Garnett. So this Oklahoma Catholic charter school can pick and choose who they want in the school, or anyone, there's going to be a lottery. People are going to be able to pick where they want. That's question one. And then question two is, isn't the state going to be able to say, these are the things you have to teach and are required to do to qualify for this funding? You might be able to teach Catholicism, but aren't they going to be able to say for at least a certain number of hours of the day or other things like that? Aren't those two things, both the enrollment piece and the curriculum piece, isn't that going to be part of receiving this funding for this Oklahoma Catholic charter school?
So first of all, I would say I think Catholics and Jewish schools are different in this way, that Catholic schools do not typically discriminate against, they don't exclude non-Catholics. I mean, historically, many times you would, like, my kids go to a parish school, so like the parish, it's a good school, so it's full. We do this sort of dibs for church members, but the Archdiocese has made clear it does not intend to limit enrollment based on religion. So that's again, back to my previous point, that's its decision. That's a typical Catholic position, and I understand the Jewish position is different. So that's just something that may just be different to these two things. As for the curriculum, I actually think it's related to some extent to what Professor Helfand was saying about whether it's a public or a private school. Different states regulate charter schools in different ways, and the goal of charter schools is to free them from most government regulations of traditional public schools in order to foster pluralism. So they have a lot more leeway about what they teach. But state by state, some may have to teach more things than others. Oklahoma virtual charter schools are pretty lightly regulated. I haven't looked carefully, but there's not a ton of requirements about what they must or may not teach. And so I don't think that that's a concern for them. But again, back to my previous point, it's important also to remember, I think, substantial equivalency. These curricular restrictions can come with or without the money. And it's just, I mean, private schools in Oklahoma and charter schools in Oklahoma are just very lightly regulated, which is one of the reasons why there's a really strong argument that charter schools in Oklahoma are not government actors.
But again, it's very dependent. So the answer that you can have charter schools will, again, understand the difference between Catholic and Jewish position. I think from a Jewish day school perspective, having a lottery or a system where anybody can come into it is obviously differs greatly from the current model we have, which would drastically change Jewish day schools and yeshivas in America. So I think that is a very big distinction you're making. But it's important, I think, for the audience to understand that charter schools are an open lottery system or others. It's going to be hard. You can't. So I just want to reiterate that for the crowd, which is one of the reasons why also when Hebrew charter schools were popping up, I and others used to say frequently that this is why it's a public school, and a distinction as Professor Garnett made between that and non-public school. And then also on the regulatory side, again, Oklahoma may be more favorable, but I imagine that as you know, the charter school situation in New York and New Jersey, there would be significant regulatory oversight to a New York or New Jersey charter school, Professor Garnett, right? We could assume.
I assume it's much more Everything's more regulated in New Jersey than Oklahoma.
Yeah.
But I do want to point out, like, I think you made a really good point. In addition to the regulation, people have called me too and said, like, why don't we turn all Catholic schools into charter schools? And I say, they're not really approving that many charter schools anymore. So maybe that's just it's not like these things are going to sweep the nation. Even if it's possible to have a Jewish or Catholic charter school, in a lot of places, to your point, they're not approving charter schools at all. I mean, charter schools used to be very popular, bipartisan, everybody loved them. And that is not the space, that's not what the political environment is very different now. So it's a religious liberty battle that matters, but as far as like education reform goes, it's really kind of a fringe issue. I think 7 states in the last year getting universal education savings accounts is much more important to Jewish day schools than the possibility of becoming a religious charter school.
So I have two final questions for both of our panelists who've been fantastic, and I'm getting my phone is blowing up with people saying how great you each have been, and how a number of people want to learn what kind of electric guitar Professor Garnett has in the background. So you're on mute. I don't know. We didn't hear what you wanted.
Oh yeah, that's my husband's and my daughter.
I got it. Okay. All right. Very, very important. So the just two final questions. They're somewhat interrelated. So if you want to answer them A and B, or you want to answer them together, which is one is I think that we're very interested in. There seems to be something in the air, and I think you both mentioned it. There seems to be something in the air in America when it comes to religion and the separation of church and state and religious liberty and freedom. And something is happening here, and I would love to hear from both of you in terms of what that sort of palpable thing is happening, from the Supreme Court decisions to now Oklahoma. To think, it seems like almost every week you read something where people are saying that faith-based Americans, there's more of a willingness to say, well, what about this or what about that, as opposed to sort of this. I was talking to a group yesterday, explaining them about the horrific anti-Catholic bigotry of the Blaine amendments, and I was explaining that to people yesterday. And I was talking also about how much hate there was to faith-based schools in America in the 19th century, and so it just seems like something is happening. And the second question I have, for selfish reasons, is we have a lot of people on the call who are advocates, people from Florida who made that ESA bill happen, people from New York and New Jersey who've been advocating for really creative things, and people who are pushing their states, both blue and red, for tax credits, for ESAs, for things, etc. And I'm interested whether or not that wave on the religious side is going to continue to help sort of the education piece. So I'm going to start with Professor Helfand, and then we'll close with Professor Garnett.
I'm going to seize the opportunity also to say something about the last question. Don't hate me, Maury. Just in terms of like the public school, private school distinction, then maybe I'll transition to your question. The charter school, private school distinction, as Nicole mentioned, problem number one is admissions when it comes to charter schools, that you have these lotteries. Problem number two, of course, is if you're a religious institution, a religious private school, you have certain kinds of other legal protections in terms of hiring. So think about, your ability to quote unquote discriminate or prefer Jewish teachers when it comes to Limudei Kodesh, religious studies. That's the kind of thing that a public school can't quite pull off. And so if you think the core of a yeshiva, of a Jewish day school, is interaction of Jewish educators with Jewish students in terms of teaching Jewish curriculum, it's really square peg round hole, I think, when you're talking about charter schools. If that's your goal, as Nicole said, every faith community should have a choice about what, have all the options available to them, and should make a decision based on what they need. So you can see hopefully why religious charter schools may not be as good a fit, or a particularly good fit, I would say, for the Orthodox Jewish community. That being said, the wave of that we've been kind of riding when it comes to private schools, and the Supreme Court kind of shifting gears, instead of viewing the exclusion of religious institutions and entities from government funding programs as required to ensure separation of church and state, flipping that to viewing that more now as, no, wait, that's actually religious discrimination. When you say anyone can apply for the secular program, you qualify on secular terms, but we're going to exclude you because you're a religious institution. The Supreme Court now views that as religious discrimination. That opens up a whole bunch of stuff. It opens up a whole bunch of stuff because what it means is anytime you have a coalition advocating for some sort of new program that is now available because of this kind of shrink in terms of what separation of church and state demands, you have lots of folks advocating for something. What it means is that religious institutions, entities, communities can partner with them, because what it means is whatever gets enacted, you can't say and no religious schools. So we're automatically in the coalition. And what it does is it generates a political game where it means that we get to partner with lots of more communities, because by definition, we're going to be part of any government funding program that's made available. So kind of this shrink when it comes to separation of church and state, not every moment when you fund something, do you automatically say, wait a minute, that's a problem. Now the Supreme Court says you're doing it for everybody, as long as we're neutral. There's no separation of church and state issue. Now, I will say one thing. There are things that lurk in the background, I'll say, for the American Jewish community when it comes to the shrinking of the Establishment Clause, the fact that there's less and less separation of church and state, that does make some folks in the American Jewish community worried, and I think at times rightfully so. There are certain issues where there may be some worries about, we're starting to see more and more legislation regarding integrating religious symbols, religious programs, chaplains within public institutions. And that might worry some people in the American Jewish community. So it's not like the fact that we're seeing limitations on separation of church and state is all good. But what we do have now is the opportunity to maybe draw some lines that make more sense, that provide more neutrality, and mean that Jewish institutions and religious institutions can participate in the public square on equal terms with everybody else. And if everybody else gets access to something, then the Jewish community has the opportunity to do so as well.
Thank you.
So I guess I would say on the legal side, I mean, there have been a number of interesting developments just in the education space. That in the last few years, on the private side, which is my side, I mean, I think that the real establishment of this clarity of the non-discrimination principle is critically important, because it does, for the reasons that Professor Helfand pointed out, enable religious communities to fully participate in these programs, but also to become a player in the shaping of them. Because you cannot exclude these schools, religious schools, from, say, a voucher program or an ESA. We know that. That's really important. And they also take to your point about, Mrs. Didden, you can talk about it if you want to, but the Blaine amendments, these state constitutional provisions, which have historically been used to try to block the expansion of parental choice in states by saying, it doesn't matter if it's federally okay, but our state, we just can't, we have this separation of church and state thing that's even bigger than the Establishment Clause. That's sort of taken that off the table, which is really important to the expansion of parental choice in the United States. So that's good. The court has made clear that the schools have the right to hire and fire ministers, which is interpreted to mean anybody who teaches the faith, even part-time. And that has provided a lot of autonomy for religious schools to maintain their identity. Whether or not that you participating in a charter school program or a voucher program or an ESA can be conditioned on waiving that so-called ministerial exception is still unanswered. And so these are all really good things. There's been a lot of religious liberty victories. I think it's also important to keep in mind, though, the reason that it's not just that the Supreme Court has become more religion friendly, and it has, but there's been a lot of religious liberty victories because there's been a lot of anti-religious actions that had to be challenged. And a lot of religious people are still go to court to challenge anti-religious actions, and that's concerning. There was speaking of Oklahoma, it has nothing to do with schools, but there was this ridiculous this incident a few weeks ago in a Catholic hospital where the Medicaid people came to inspect and told them if they didn't put out their sanctuary candle, they were going to get kicked out of the Medicaid program. They seem to not understand, like, every Catholic chapel has a candle, and they said it was a fire code violation. I mean, we shouldn't have to be fighting about sanctuary candles, but there is an increasing ignorance of and hostility to religion, and that's leading to more litigation. And religious people tend to be winning, but that's bad because we're having to file lawsuits. Okay, but the second thing I will say, which is I think a mitigated good for religious people, and religious schools is that COVID changed something in education policy, and it has opened the floodgates to a dramatic expansion of private school choice that is enabling religious schools and religious parents to take public funds, the public funds allocated to their kids, and to educate them as they see fit. And I think with, Florida, Arkansas, Iowa, West Virginia, Utah, South Carolina, North Carolina, Indiana, New Hampshire, I don't know. All of these places are getting to near universal private school choice. And that's great for believers, because those programs say you choose, it's your choice. It's not the government's choice how you educate your kid. And I don't think you can, there's sort of escape velocity going on here. I was just in Arizona and everybody's saying, how could there be 100,000 kids on this program? You can't stop it once it gets going. If you can chip at it regulatorily, that is a really good thing for religious believers and a really good thing for religious schools. And it's also just because Jewish and Catholic schools and other religious schools have done a great job of educating kids, not just in the faith, but both the heart and mind. And they have long been unjustly excluded from that important task of educating the public. And that's changing. And I think that's just a great thing.
I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank our audience. Where else could you hear in under 45 minutes a great history of religious freedom in America, what it means for education, what charter schools are and how they differ from non-public schools, and a prediction made here on what the Supreme Court's going to do about this in 45 minutes or less. We are very grateful to our advocates. The Teach Coalition, a project of the Orthodox Union, has the kind of people who dedicate 45 minutes of their time. But if you feel like you want to learn more about this, reach out to us, and we're happy to share more information as this develops on it. And please share this kind of thing with other advocates, other of your friends and family. We hope you're a little bit more informed on these issues. We thank our two professors here. I feel like I would have gotten a score to 152 now instead of 151 on my LSAT had I heard these two professors. And I'm so excited to continue to learn from them. And we're very grateful that they're out there working. And really grateful they're out there discussing religion and educational choice in the public square, which we think is critical. So thank you all, and we look forward to more and great conversations like this.